Welcome everybody. This is the eighth episode of All That's Kerala, a chat along the backwaters. It's a twice monthly program that city book leaders, of which Mohit Gupta is here, and the Kerala Museum, of which Atithi is here with us, are presenting. And I am the one who does all the talking. What we try to do through All That's Kerala is to introduce Kerala to the country and the world, and of course to Kerala itself. My special thanks as always to Mohit Gupta and to Atithi of the Kerala Museum for your introductions and for your support to this program. Today's episode is on the cuisines of Kerala. And we look at a wide spectrum of food that is on serve in Kerala, literally from Karimeen to Kulukki Sarbath. For those who do not know, Karimeen is Kerala's favorite fish. It's called, inadequately I would say, the pearl spot fish in English. It's called the pearl spot because it's a black fish with what looks like spots of pearl on its back. But ask me, and I'll tell you that pearl spot does not quite capture the magic of Karimeen, the taste of Karimeen, the exotic nature of Karimeen, which, pardon my ignorance, and my guest today, Thomas Fenn, can correct me later on. It's a river fish. We in Kerala love river fish, unlike maybe many others who love sea fish. Now, Karimeen is Kerala's traditional fish. And for those who have tasted it, there's nothing quite equal to it. Whether it's fried in spices and in coconut oil, that could be exquisite. It could be mouth-watering. And whether it's cooked with raw mangoes and coconut milk, in a very traditional Malayali cooking, there's nothing quite there to beat it, I would say. And no real feast, except of course the Onam Sadhya and other vegetarian meals, is quite complete without a Karimeen dish. So while Karimeen symbolizes the traditional food in Kerala, we go from Karimeen to Kuliki Sarbath. And Kuliki Sarbath symbolizes the new generation of exotic food that the young Malayali and of course the old Malayali. So today's episode, Karimeen to Kuliki Sarbath, really means that we intend to take you on this culinary journey of Kerala from traditional food and palate and cuisine of Kerala through the widest possible spectrum of the cuisine in Kerala to the new and exotic and emerging types of food and drinks that Kerala is getting used to. So the young man who is with us today, Thomas Fenn, is the one who co-founded it and brought the Malayali cuisine to the upmarket 3 and 4 stars of restaurants of Delhi. Welcome, Thomas. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. I remember being in Mahabelly a couple of years ago. Extremely good food. Thank you for being on a chat along the backwaters. Let me start off by asking you, by telling you, rather, not even asking you, that it must have been very brave of you to invest and start an up-end specialty restaurant serving Malayali food in upmarket New Delhi. That Mahabelly was a runaway hit is history. Everybody knows about it in Delhi now. Are you a lover of Malayali food, Kerala food? Do you have a Mahabelly yourself, a huge belly, a pot belly? So let me ask you, how did you get this idea to start such a specialty Kerala restaurant, as you call it, in Delhi? And who gave you the courage to start?
Thanks a lot for giving me this platform to talk about our journey, mine and Zach Jacob, who's my co-founder, our journey together in bringing Malayali food to Delhi. The fundamental reason why we started was surprisingly, till the point that we started in 2015, March 2015. Till that point in time, there wasn't any standalone Malayali restaurant in New Delhi, which was just surprising to us because every single person in Delhi or our friends, colleagues, Malayalis, non-Malayalis, that we had bumped into and had eaten this food, like this kind of food before, loved it. There were South Indian restaurants, of course. It was Kerala cuisine was bucketed, unfortunately, through that painful stereotype of all South Indian states being one place. There were multiple South Indian restaurants that served a few of the star Kerala dishes, if you may, here and there, but there were no standalone Malayali restaurants that went through the length and breadth of Kerala. like that. And that was the fundamental idea behind why we kind of brought it in. I think there was a bit of brute luck also involved, because this is also a time when regional food, right? Like regional food, which means food of Assam, food of Bengal, multiple states. There was a lot of growing interest in state-based cuisine generally. Like there was a trend in that direction where people ranging between a spectrum of high food snobbery to a genuine interest in eating more and more things was kind of developing, at least in the metro cities in India. Tier 2 cities, maybe not, but in the metro cities. So in that context, it made sense to kind of delve into this, or at least, take a stab at doing this. And we picked Malayali cuisine for two reasons. One, it did not exist in the stat. Of course, there were small, run-of-the-mill shacks, or which were not super hygienic. There weren't places that you could take your colleagues to or your family to. Hygiene was questionable. So we wanted to kind of, I wouldn't say bring up an upscale restaurant, because we also believe that Malayali food should be by default and by principle affordable on some level, but also to kind of class it up and jazz it up a little bit, and bring it to a more modern Indian context. That's basically the idea behind why we wanted to do it. We picked South Delhi as a spot to start off, because it was the only location that became available to us. And what was also interesting was that Kerala, by sheer luck, Kerala was also becoming a very popular spot for a lot of non-Malayalis to visit as a tourism place. So, which means that these people would come back to Delhi, and they had a very strong reference point in terms of what kind of food to expect, or like you pointed out, they heard a lot more about Karimeen and the various tapioca and jackfruit and chakka and all of these things that they would probably eat in there. So they were also interested in finding spaces in their hometowns or in their home cities like Delhi to kind of experience this from scratch. On the supply side, I think there was also growing interest. So this is on the demand side. There was clearly a lot of pent-up demand. Like people wanted Malayali food. It was just a question of restaurants not offering it. So to counter that in each of these cities, like again, I say tier 1 cities, there was this growing trend of chefs and restaurateurs also starting to push the bracket and trying to integrate more and more Malayali cuisine or build menus around Malayali cuisine. There is Chef Reggie Matthew, who's doing an excellent job in Chennai with Kappa Chaka Kangari. There's Thomas Zachariah, who's kind of taken a more modern Indian approach to it with the Bombay Cuisine located in Mumbai. There is the Permit Room in Bangalore, and then there is us in Delhi. So I think we kind of met at that, at that cross point where there was an uptick in terms of demand, and also people were seeing more and more of Kerala cuisine, and hence wanting to have more of this. So the timing was just right.
Let me come to the food itself, Thomas. Let me come to the food itself that you serve there. Do you? I'm sure you serve Karimeen there. You serve Karimeen, of course. I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
But my question is not that. Do you serve Kulukki Sarbath there? Shaken, not stirred?
We do. We do. Right.
Wow,
we do.
And people.
It's a fairly popular drink. So, I mean, over there, we when we have to explain it to our customers, right? We probably sell it in the context of, look, it's basically a lime juice with basil seeds in it, or you have to pander to the crowd a little bit, but it's a stellar drink. Like it's very popular at the restaurant as it stands. Karimeen, though, honestly, we didn't start with it. That was kind of a calculated choice because there was a general resistance towards fish with bones in it. Look, our target audience was Malayalis, of course, but for a restaurant to be sustainable in Delhi, you have to appeal to the local crowd on some level. So Karimeen, I think it was outside the bounds of expectation to kind of expect people to dive straight into the disease. I can't eat a Karimeen properly myself even today. It's a skill in itself, like picking the meat away from the bones and spending. It's a very tactile experience like that. So Karimeen featured on the menu a lot later when we started getting confident in how we can kind of sell a story around, hey, you like boneless fish, then why didn't you try this also? This the only place that you find in India is in Kerala. So this is the place, this is the place that you are going to find it nowhere else in Delhi, if you may.
An announcement for our listeners, our viewers, Thomas. As usual, we would welcome questions that you would like to direct to Thomas Fenn. As he speaks, I will read them out as we receive them. And and there's already a sort of a statement from Wilson. He says Kulki Sarbath is more like let me read that. I couldn't read that properly.
It's more like Jimmy Kamal. Sure.
Sorry, come again. Yes. Yeah. He says, I'll read it later. I'm not able to read it now properly. Sorry about that.
It's more like Jimmy Kamal. He's referring to the popular.
Yeah, it's like Jimmy Kamal.
Yeah.
Can you explain what he means and what your answer is?
Well, I would imagine it's cutting edge Malayali street food, if you may. One direction that we kind of avoid, in Mahabelly is also, while we call ourselves an authentic Kerala restaurant, we also try to stay away from putting too much weight on the idea of authenticity. Also, because I personally think it's kind of limiting in its aspect. So if you can take a traditional recipe and kind of build on it and remake that into something that is tasty also, I think that's perfectly fine, which is what we do at home also, right? We reinterpret every day. We reinterpret recipes that we grew up eating into things that are more palatable to us. So I'd imagine Kulukki Sarbath is one of those, it's one of those things. It's not technically traditional when you think about it, but it exists because it's widely popular, and it's probably originated right here in Kerala.
What do you think have been the global influences on Kerala cuisine? I'm sure it's come through migrant traders. There have been diverse communities who have come and settled down in Kerala. There's, of course, the influence of Tamil cooking. You spoke about dosha and idli, sambar, upma, uttapam, etc. These have all been influences on the Malayali cooking. What do you think has been the global, and by global I also mean the influence of food from within India, but more globally? What has been the global influences on Kerala cuisine?
So Kerala has been it's been a trader state, right? Like it has a very long coastline, which automatically meant that historically there was a lot of trade that happened via the sea. You had Persian influences coming from the Middle East. You had the Portuguese, who in their entire exercise in global expansion landed up in Kerala. You had Jewish communities who ran away under great turmoil. Kerala has been like a settlement region for most of these places, and it's fairly natural that they would also bring some of their food habits, into the state in itself. If I had to, while my knowledge on this is not entirely wide, the baseline is this: that the Muslims traders brought in a lot of ingredients that were otherwise not native to Kerala, such as papaya, tamarind, custard apple. These are not historically ingredients that were native to Kerala. These were brought in, through the north of Kerala, and they kind of propagated themselves with time, and they kind of developed into dishes in themselves. On the Christian side, I think it came through the Portuguese, if I'm not mistaken. So, which means that all of our meat and poultry preparations, in its essence, like the use of vinegar, even pork, beef, mutton, all of these in their core constitution of recipes came through the Portuguese side. In fact, when I was just researching for this conversation, in fact, I came up with a fun fact. Putta, by the way, was developed by the Portuguese to basically serve, like when they were traveling by the sea, they needed like a staple that was easy for them to carry with them. And something that was available in vast quantities in Kerala at that point was rice powder, and steaming it was a very easy thing to do on a ship. So putta and its proliferation was basically, like a point of sustenance for sailor people, these Portuguese people, to kind of take back.
I think it is. It might not be quite correct. It is really wrong to speak of Kerala cuisine as one integrated whole. There's so much of variant to it. So much of variant. The food in, say, North Kerala and Kannur, for example, would be very different from North Malabar, not even North Kerala. Northern Kerala is called Malabar, and Northern Malabar, the food there would be different from South Malabar. The food in Malabar, which is North Kerala, would be very different from the food in Central Kerala. The food in Central Kerala itself has so many variants. The food in Trichur would be very different not quite different from the food in a district like Kotte. The food in South Kerala Kerala would be very different from all this. And then, so there is the regional differences, and then there are the community differences. The food, I think, that is served in a Nair household or a Hindu household or an Edawa household can be different. The food that's served in Muslim households would be very different. Amongst Christians, the food in Christian, South Syrian Christian households would be different from Latin Christian food, Jewish food you talked about. So there's so many different variants of the Kerala palate. How does this diversity play out? What do you think diversity going to die out in course of time because communication is so much. You see, just as you see Pepsi and Coca-Cola everywhere, and different types of regional differences dying out. Would you think that these regional differences, firstly, your question on these, your answer on these, your comments on these regional differences. Secondly, do you think over course of time they might die out?
So I think there is a fair bit of impetus or momentum in the direction of preserving these recipes in its entirety that should be done. Like, so there are some pivotal books also that have been written on this. B.F. Burgess has done a lot on Christian cooking for large weddings and all of that. There's also the Suryani kitchen, which talks at length about the cooking techniques and that were employed by the Syrian Christians of their time. So I do believe there is definitely something that there is, and this is true of most traditional things, right? They're like lost history kind of thing. As long as society has a concrete action in the direction of preserving it, it is going to die out. That's the unfortunate part of it. But which is even at our restaurant, like for example, I haven't traveled much to the north of Kerala, so I'm not exposed to a lot of the food over there. And yet there are certain, there are these little things there, like a Talasheri biryani, for example, is something that I have eaten because it's one of their biggest, exports in that sense in the rest of Kerala. So I think in order to keep these culinary traditions alive, there is a lot of work that is happening and should continue to happen. And more importantly, restaurants should also take the responsibility of kind of bringing this out in the mainstream and kind of educating people about why one is different from the other, rather than just selling what sells. So this is also something that we are trying to do. It's something that we've, over a period of time, trying to expand our menu, also add in a few things, that we did not have before. But to speak on the differences, right, like on the diversity by region, I would like to believe that this is also it's a majoritarian concept. So if you go to the north of Kerala, it is the only place where I've eaten kallumakaya, which they serve as a how do you say, as a pakoda, where they deep fry it. Like you eat it just like you would a bhaji or a bonda, right? So now the popularity of that item on the street, and you find it in any corner. Like it's not just on the beach around the Calicut or this thing. You find it's very popular out there. Is the reason why it exists in that context, right? Now, as you move down south away from there, it disappears simply because there's no demand for it, and also there's no awareness for it. So I think that the differences in food habits between the regions is also driven by what is familiar to these people while they grow up. So for me, the food that is familiar to me that when I was growing up is kappa and meat curry, is the erchi roast, is the biryani. Even the biryanis that I eat at home is completely different from the biryanis that I get at restaurants, where even if it is in a place like Cochin, right? So there are these little treasures. There's in a place called Kodamangalam in Kerala. There is this preparation of kurka. And kurka is a Chinese potato which they cook with coke. I've not heard of it anywhere else in Kerala. Towards again in the Alleppey Alva side, there is kakka erchi fry, which is a small clams and mussels which they deep fry. Karimeen, even though it is if we had a national animal for Kerala, I would believe it would be Karimeen. But even though it is widely popular, it is in a certain belt of Kerala that it is popular, where people can afford it. Also, it's not a cheap fish, right? So it's never going to be a fish of the people, if you may. So there are many. I think that distinction between why different kinds of foods are also popular in different and why it's so varied is a function of social strata, is a function of purchasing power, is a function of availability of these ingredients in these particular, and seasonality, of course.
Haji Sarkalachan points out that matti, the sardines, is also very popular in Kerala, and it's a much cheaper food. And Mati is traditionally fried or cooked. We didn't speak about the sardines and the mackerels. What do you say to
It is
that?
it is my by the way, they're my two favorite fishes. I'm putting this on record. Is not the Karimeen. One is mati and the second one is chura or tuna. These are my two, and netoli, of course. My God, the small anchovies. Now, mati is a great example of uh, basically food of the people, right? It is cheap. It is an excellent source of protein.
Mati
It
and
is
sardines, for those who do
it
not
is
know.
cheap. It is widely available. It is, with the exception of 2 months in the year, it is available for consumption in most places in Kerala. It is extremely, I would say, one of the most nutritious, if not the most nutritious fish that you can have. The only reason why it usually gets a bad rep, if you may, is for two reasons. One, the fact that it is cheap. They don't like, there are people who don't like serving it at their houses when they have guests over, because they feel that it's not representative of how much it's not representative of their hospitality, or the grandioseness of the affair. So the fact that it is cheap is also is one drawback there. The second one is it's a smelly fish. So which is why, in fact, in my grandmother's place, in both houses, in fact, both my paternal and my maternal grandmother's places, there was a specific area in the kitchen which was the only place allowed in the kitchen to descale, clean mati and cook mati, because otherwise it would stink up the whole house. Fun fact again, there is a quick fix to kind of stop that from happening. I'm told if you light a paraffin wax candle while you're cooking mati, it doesn't stink up the house.
That's
So
that's good news. I think
you
the
should
next time we
you should
cook
probably,
here, we will.
it's an incredibly flavorful fish. Like it is
Right.
like fantastic. I have no words for
Right.
it.
Speaking of mati, Thomas, when I was young, in my grandfather had these coconut groves, and mati was so
Hmm.
cheap that sardines used to be used as fertilizers for the coconut trees. Once in a year,
Oh,
when
this
you
I did
had
not know.
this chagara, when sardines would be, extremely cheap, ton loads of it for a rupee or so, that would be used as fertilizers. And very interestingly, when I was in Lisbon, Portugal, sardines is the favorite food there. You got so many sardine restaurants there, but I don't think they quite taste as good as the sardines we get in India and we get in Kerala. But that's good news to know that if you put a paraffin wax candle, you can get over the smell. Thomas, jackfruit has recently been discovered as an excellent medical properties. How do you see the jackfruit as a future in Kerala cuisine? It's not very widely popular in Malayali restaurants across the world or across India, but I'm sure it'll become a part of the Kerala cuisine very soon. What is your take on it?
It is interesting that you point this out. So I grew up eating a lot of chakka. Honestly, it was like it was a staple at my house. But increasingly, I'm seeing that I see this lesser and lesser in markets also. So my father actually he grows rambutan in Bayur. So before he was moved, he started growing rambutan. He considered jackfruit for a while. And an interesting thing that he told me was that all pretty much all the jackfruit that is grown in Kerala is actually exported to Thailand, because it fetches a much better price in Southeast Asia, and also that increasingly the consumption of it locally is going down. I would imagine for two reasons. One, same thing. It's a fairly smelly fruit, so you have to really know how to deal with it. It's not a fruit where you can just pick up, cut, leave in your fridge for days to come. Like you really have to kind of understand how the fruit behaves, how it decomposes over a period of time, and it's a very large fruit, right? Like you have to, if you buy one, you are pretty much saddled with it for a very long period of time. So we at the restaurant also we haven't done it yet, but we also want to kind of bring jackfruit to the forefront in its dessert form, in its chakka the form, like as an alternative to tapioca also, because it has this very gentle sweetness to it also, unlike tapioca. Um, so I think um, if anything, if it is becoming, if it's losing its popularity, I could be wrong on this, and this is just a personal. If it is losing its popularity in Kerala, I would only believe that it's because it's an inconvenient ingredient per se. It's sticky. It's like it has a sap. It has to be wrapped a certain way. But that being said, I have a close friend of mine who is mad about jackfruit and mad about chakka, to the point that every time he comes to Kerala, he pays about 10 to 15 kilos of excess baggage to fly jackfruit from Kerala to Delhi, and then that becomes a supply for the next 6 months. He cooks it in the form of putta and all of these things, so extremes, of course. But I think with the right impetus, I think restaurants can do this, because it also works a lot better at scale.
Vegetarian food is diverse. I know you will be able to tell us much more than that. There's Olen and Kalan and Thoran and Avial and Kayoperi and Pulisheri and Elisheri and Injipuli, you mentioned Kurkoperi, Medikaperiti, you mentioned Uppilita. There's so much diversity. And then we have the Onam Sadhya, an absolute veritable spread of food. And then amongst the Sadhyas, the Aranmula Valla Sadhya, which is exquisite. So on the one hand, we have so much of non-vegetarian food and so much of such tasty, rich vegetarian food. We didn't mention that. Can you explain this dichotomy, and can you give a bit of a sense of the vegetarian food that we have in Kerala?
So when we were setting the menu at the restaurant, one of the challenges we faced that we could not fill the menu with vegetarian items, and that was quite surprising for the same reason that you said, right? There's so many vegetarian dishes that we can kind of put on the menu. So an interesting thing over here is that, one, I don't believe that India is a vegetarian country. That's it's a narrative that's often lost. We have a fair amount of meat eaters over here. I would say that Kerala as a state is probably the most balanced, omnivorous, if you may, consumers of food in that sense. The only difference between, I would say, Kerala and the other states is that we don't eat, vegetarian food the way, it's not a roti and it's not a bread and a curry. It's not a one-to-one, combination that we do with vegetarian food. It is always at least four, right? Your meal will have rice, which is vegetarian. It will have a sambar, which is vegetarian. It will have paripu. It will have more. It will have thoran. It will have kalan. So you don't have just rice and kalan, just rice and erisheri, just rice and it's rare. So when we consume vegetarian food in Kerala, I'd like to say that it's usually a bouquet of vegetarian dishes rather than standalone stuff. And the best example, like you rightly pointed out, is the sadhya. And I think the sadhya has kind of, Zach and I joke once in a while that the sadhya is the gateway drug to Malayali cuisine north of South India, basically. Because A, it is vegetarian. B, there is a fair amount of color and drama that is involved in serving it. It's served on a banana leaf, which is an extremely colorful, meal. It is picture worthy. It is incredible bang for buck. This is the one time of the year you have 22 vegetarian dishes, right? If you walk into the same Malayali restaurant any time of the year, you will not find any of these vegetarian dishes. But this particular day of the year, which is Onam, you have 22, a wide variety of things that come out. So I think the sadhya has kind of taken Malayali food into the Indian mainstream. I stand by this. In fact, for the first year that we served, when we opened in 2015, we opened in March, right? And in the beginning, of course, you're a new restaurant, not many people know about you. The marketing has to be done. But then came Onam on August, right? And we didn't I wouldn't say that we had super marketing skills or anything, but the whole of Delhi descended upon us.